Okay, well, hopefully he will appear. I know that they're rehearsing a play, so that could be a conflict for him today. Okay, I'll go ahead and call the meeting to order. It's 4:01 p.m. This is the meeting of the Manzanita Planning Commission. It's our regular meeting date and time. Welcome back, everybody, after a nice 3-month break. I say everybody except staff, who we know have been paddling like little ducks with their little feet under the water this whole summer. Thank you. We appreciate that. First item on the agenda is audience participation. Is there anyone in our audience today that would like to speak on any topic that is not already on our agenda?
And Karen, I have Mike Garner. Go ahead,
Okay.
Mike. Huh?
Are you with us, Mike?
Mike, you had your hand up. Do you have something? He put his hand back down.
Okay.
And I have no other hands up.
Okay. Thank you, Scott. Next item on the agenda is the approval of the minutes of our May 13th, 2024 meeting. I was absent at that meeting, so I'm going to abstain from any vote, but I would like to ask the rest of the Planning Commission if they've read the minutes and if there are any additions, subtractions, or corrections that need to be made. Yeah, Tom, please.
In part 5, where it said that a motion was made and seconded by Thomas Christ on the condition that his name be spelled correctly. My name's not spelled correctly there. Or in the roll section, it's Christ.
Thank you.
Other than that, they look fine.
Okay, so
I was at the meeting.
We'll fix that. Okay. Anybody else have corrections or changes to make? If not, I'll entertain a motion to approve as corrected.
I move we approve the minutes with Tom's name spelled correctly.
Thank you, John. Is there a second?
I will second that.
Okay. We'll take that. It's been moved and seconded to approve the minutes as corrected. All in favor say aye or raise your hand.
Aye.
Okay, looks unanimous. Thank you very much. Okay, I'm going to turn this meeting over to staff for an update on our long-awaited comp plan and housing ordinance update. So who wants to take the lead on that?
I'll jump in and then I'll hand it over to Scott Frago to get us rolling. But yeah, thanks. We're so excited to be here today. We have the full consultant team with us. And I think probably Scott will take a moment to introduce that team to this body. But we have already begun the process of the comprehensive plan. We, just so for folks that are watching or participating, we invited the city council today, and some members are here just to watch, as well as members of the Public Advisory Steering Committee, which has already met once and is currently working on doing some stakeholder outreach and engagement. So we've kicked off the project. This is our first engagement with all of you. So we'll be sharing some of the work or just sort of the overall picture, and Scott can go into more detail about it. I won't steal all your thunder here, Scotty. And then we actually do want to engage in a bit of a discussion with the Planning Commission today about some of the housing ordinance related items, which will be led by our subject matter expert, Marcy McAnally, who is also here today. So we're really excited. I think things are rolling along pretty darn well, and we're ready to get this thing kicked off with all of you. So with that, I'll hand it over to Scott to introduce the team and kind of go over what our agenda is for the day.
Excellent. Thank you, Layla. Well, it's great to see all you commissioners again. You've probably seen me in wearing kind of a different hat when I come in front of you as your city planner on contract to help with current planning. But today's a little different. My firm, 3J Consulting, that I work for, is leading the comp plan. We're very excited to be selected to be the consultant team to do this. I know that you had 3 very good bids put in, and we were very fortunate and thankful to win and be able to work with you on this. I've had the pleasure, as I mentioned, to be able to work with you all on current planning issues, but this is a little different. And I know you've been anticipating, doing some long range planning, particularly some housing work. This will kind of allows us to start that process after, talking about it for quite a long time. One neat thing I guess I would mention is you've already been working on doing some visioning. So we kind of already have a head start on getting this work done, which is great. So thank you, Layla, and all of you for starting that work ahead of time. I'll introduce myself and then we'll introduce the team and then we'll get into kind of the presentation and what we'll be doing this afternoon/evening. Again, Scott Fregonesi, 3J Consulting. I'll be acting as a project manager with Violet Brown. Violet, you want to introduce yourself?
My name's Violet Brown. I am a long-range planner, a senior planner at 3J Consulting. I've been a planner for about 10 years, and prior to 3J, I was with Fregonesi Associates. And prior to that, I spent about a decade as a housing advocate and a housing attorney in New York City, representing elderly who were facing eviction. So I have a long history in housing and also comp plans, and super excited to be on this project. Why don't you go, Marcy?
Hi, everyone. I'm Marcy McAnally. I'm an architect and founder, president of UrbsWorks, an urban design firm based in Portland. And I have a specialty in code amendments, especially related to housing. And I'm excited to introduce this topic this evening. Can I turn it over to Journey?
Yes, please.
Hello, everybody. I'm Journey Gehring. I'm an associate planner at 3J Consulting, and I'm newer to the planning realm generally, but I'm really excited to be here and work and assist on this project.
Great. And I don't, Cody is, I don't know if you've been introduced to him, but he's kind of part of our team too. He's working for the city, but he is part of our comp plan team. So Cody, thank you for being here. I don't know if you want to introduce yourself, but he's playing a really helpful role with us in terms of helping us keep organized, helping us with the committees and outreach, and also just keeping us all straight. So we appreciate having Cody on the team as well. So Marcy, what's the best way? Do you want me to share the presentation, or would you like to share it? We can do either way.
I prefer if you shared it, so I don't have any.
No problem. I have it ready. I just wanted to make sure you didn't want to have control of it.
If you don't mind, though, I will tell you to move to the next.
That sounds great. So I will share my screen right now. I'm disabled. Scott, you got to let me show my screen.
You should be able to do it now. Sorry about that.
Thank you, sir. Okay, hopefully everyone can see that. And the way it will work is most of this presentation is going to be Marcy, but I'll do a little bit of an introduction, and then I'll do a little bit of description of kind of our outreach plan and overall schedule after we get through some of the housing. I think, this particular meeting is really focused on the housing work that we're going to lead into as part of the first effort of the comp plan update. In terms of the agenda, we kind of already did our welcomes and introductions. As I mentioned, I'll do a quick project overview with the schedule. Then Marcy will take on the housing ordinance update work, and that'll be the heavy lifting for tonight. I'll touch lightly on the community engagement plan, and then I'll let you know where that is, and in case you'd like to dive deeper and take a look at that. And then next steps and adjourn. So hopefully it'll be a productive meeting. If you have questions during the presentation, you can ask us. Also, we have allocated plenty of time after we get through kind of the presentation for questions, discussions. I think that's really where we'll get a lot of information from you all, and hopefully we'll be able to answer any questions you have. In terms of our project overview, this is our overall schedule. Now, this is a little bit unique in terms of the process, because typically when we do a comprehensive plan update, we're not so heavily focused on updating our housing ordinance, for example. But because of SB 406, as you all know, there's some DLCD, Department of Land Conservation and Development, has given the city some grant money to help fund this in conjunction with the comp plan update. So it's a great time to do it. I know you've all been waiting to and looking forward to do this. So we have essentially the comprehensive plan and the ordinance updates happening at the same time. Well, we're already into fall, so really we've started our community visioning and goal setting, and you all have been doing that actually for over a year now. So we're getting into that. And then we're starting our housing ordinance audit this fall, along with our community engagement and outreach and existing conditions and our any land use analysis. That's basically has been happening since we started the project till now. This winter, after we get through this, we're going to move into the comprehensive plan update. So that's where we're looking at formulating all of the documents in terms of the policy framework, the document itself with the comp plan and all the chapters. The chapters themselves follow the statewide planning goals. I'm not going to get too deep into those, but each chapter will touch on each of the statewide planning goals as we move through updating the comp plan. So we'll do, and then if you notice below, the housing ordinance happening, and then the draft concepts will come in winter and spring. So by spring, we'll actually have a draft ordinance that we'll be talking with you about, and then we'll go into summer of next year to adopting that housing ordinance again as we're working through the comp plan. I do want to point out these community summits. These are kind of bigger community events. We have 4 of them planned throughout the process. Later on in the presentation, I'll get into a little bit of how we phased this, but we have 4 kind of outreach phases that we've designed into this process. And along with each of those 4 phases, we have large community summits. These are large gathering events where we invite people to come in person. So community summit number 1, we're looking at October now. So keep an eye out for when we have that event. It will be again focused on housing because that's what we're starting with. Community summit 2 will be in the spring, another one in the summer, and then hopefully another one in the fall. All of these summits will have different topic areas that relate to different chapters in the plan. So that'll be really important. As we're moving through this, again, we have our Public Advisory Steering Committee, PASC meetings. Again, Layla mentioned we met with them once, but we will be meeting with them regularly throughout the process, as well as meeting with you, the Planning Commission, and as well as City Council. And we'll get briefings throughout. Hopefully at the end, we'll have an adoption of a comprehensive plan and updated zoning ordinance as we go through this, and that'll be the final product. So any questions on the schedule or kind of how this is set up before we get into the housing work? I know this is kind of quick and just a overall. Yes, Tom.
Thanks, Scott. I'm sorry, but I'm a little unclear on the role of the Planning Commission in this process. Are we just here to give advice along the way, or do we ultimately have some decision-making authority about the plan or any of its components? Do we bless it and send it on to City Council? What exactly do we do?
Yes. So you and the Public Advisory Committee will be vetting materials that we will be using for public meetings and whatnot, for example. So you will be part of this and giving us advice and making sure that we move along through it. Ultimately, when we get to adoption, yes, you will have to say, we agree that this is the right direction for both the housing ordinance updates and the comp plan. So yeah, as a commission, you will have to make sure that whatever we send to City Council is up to snuff in your eyes. So you will be reviewing and part of the adoption process for both the ordinance and the comp plan. But we want to keep you up to speed along the way, so we're not hitting you at the very end and saying, okay, we've worked on this for a year and a half and now we're going to adopt it. So we want to have you up to speed, so when we get to adoption, everyone already knows how we got to where we are and why the plan and the ordinance is written the way it is.
Thank you.
Sure. Yeah, Karen.
Okay, there we go. Thank you. I see, at the bottom that the housing ordinance is going to be the first thing that is going to go through.
Yes.
Are you saying that by fall next year, we will have completely updated the entire zoning ordinance as part of this process? Or will we be working specifically on the comprehensive plan and then developing ordinances later?
Great question. We will be developing the housing ordinance kind of upfront as part of the comp plan update. So I think that the actual housing ordinance will likely be adopted before the comp plan is adopted. There's no reason we have to wait to adopt the housing ordinance to adopt the comp plan. I also think that the comp plan is going to take a little bit longer than the housing ordinance updates. So it'll probably be the housing ordinance then comp plan is how I see it happening. Does that help?
It does, but I'm asking specifically about the zoning ordinances, the enacting ordinances after the comp plan. That comes after this whole process? Okay, thank you.
So there will likely be recommendations that come out of the comp plan to do specific things within your zoning code. So for example, a topic that we've discussed as a group, I've discussed with you as well, is parking ratios and how much parking we should require. So that's not something that's necessarily going to be in the comp plan. There's probably going to be some parking related recommendations. I know there's going to be some parking related recommendations as part of your housing ordinance update, but there may be other parking things that come out of this of the comp plan update. There would be recommendations or as part of an action under a policy. Maybe the policy is, look into parking ratios that make sense for Manzanita, and the action would be review zoning code and update as necessary. That's very basic. Of course, it would be something, but that's just an example. So I do think that there will be additional ordinance updates that will happen after the comp plan process. All right. Yeah, John.
I will jump in real quick. You'll hear us as consultants say code a lot.
Oh, thank you.
We do know it's an ordinance, but it's old habits die hard. So we're trying. We do know.
Thank you very much, Violet. Yes, this is something that we've run into all the time. We know your city is run by ordinances, but I say code because that's just a planner term, but updated ordinances. And it says it right in the PowerPoint, and you'd think I would figure that out, but I'm still old habits never die. So thank you, Violet. I appreciate that. Go ahead, John.
Are we going to do, I think it's section 10, the housing piece of the comprehensive plan prior to doing the ordinance? Are they going to go concurrently, or how do you see that working?
Great question. Again, we are going to do the housing chapter concurrently with the ordinance update because it's the same topic area. So what we've done in these 4 phases, and I wish I would have had this slide up front a little bit, but I promise we'll get to this, but it shows kind of the topic areas we cover in these 4 phases of engagement. And we specifically put chapter 10, which is the housing chapter, up front because the housing ordinance is up front, and it only makes sense to do that work at the same time. So great pick up on that one. So, okay. Yeah, Bert.
Yeah, just real quickly, your scope and the funding covers the housing ordinance in this policy document, which is the comprehensive plan. And I suspect that there will be, as you've alluded to, many more potential modifications to the land use ordinance in the future, including potentially a different strategy associated with that form-based code as opposed to a written code kind of thing. And so as you go through this process, at these key moments, will there be opportunity to discuss, do we turn left or turn right? Do we continue to remodel a 1985 kind of old Buick, or do we, go ahead and get a new electric version of a code?
No, that's perfect. And I think Marcy's actually going to probably talk about some of this when she gets into her slides, but I think there is definitely some form-based ideas and thoughts that we might want to lean towards, particularly for the housing ordinance. And if that ends up working there's no reason why you couldn't move that into some of the other ordinance as well. So yes, I would say for sure that there would be an opportunity to move to the electric world, if you will. So
And I will jump in before you move on, Scott. I just think that it's important that the housing ordinance needs to be kind of adoption ready earlier than the comp plan does. You will be looking at the comp plan all together for adoption, all of the chapters together for adoption. But when we, over the 2 years, we are phasing our conversations and our engagement around topic areas. So we're going to talk about housing first. We're going to work on the housing chapter. The ordinance will definitely be ready for adoption much longer before the comp plan. But when you go to adopt the comp plan, it will be the entire comp plan. It's not going to be chapter by chapter. So we'll go through more of the explanation of the process, but I just wanted to make sure that was clear.
Yep, go right ahead.
Yeah, just a short one is that obviously the TSP was adopted. I think it was adopted by the city council.
Yep.
And there were, as in addition to the parking, there were other numerous kind of old school policies and ordinance language in that document. And so I suspect that along with the parking, there will be an opportunity to update some of the other language that will make the housing actually work, as it's updated.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. And like I said, I think we'll actually discuss some of those options today, some of those concepts and options, just as a bigger picture until we, get specific about the ordinance itself. But yes, that would be the quick answer. Okay, Marcy, I think it's your turn now for the housing ordinance update section of the presentation.
Okay.
So go right ahead and you can say next and I will go next.
Next, please. All right. So this answers a few of the questions or elaborates on some of the answers that were provided earlier that my job really is to lead you to a hearings ready ordinance amendments to the housing chapters of your code to make it comply with the various state rules that you need to comply with. That's on a sooner time frame. It may be that the hearings ready amendments package kind of sits and waits for the other ordinance amendments to come through. That wouldn't be unusual a way to go about this at all. But my job is to, I think we can actually just move to the next slide. My job is to make sure that you comply with the middle housing rules that were passed by the state of Oregon a few years ago, and then expanded to Tillamook County through SB 406. And I'm going to go into a lot more detail about what this means to you, particularly in the next few slides. The three main stages of my work, though, will be code audit and concepts. And I'm engaged in that task right now. Then there will be a draft code update for you to review, particularly the Planning Commission, but it will be part of the entire comprehensive plan project. So it will be, concepts around code amendments will be brought out to the public and will be part of the community engagement based on feedback and specifically feedback from Planning Commission, but from the larger comprehensive plan public engagement program. I will revise that and then we'll arrive at a hearings ready package of code amendments having to do with middle housing. Are there any, how about we save questions for a few more slides in? So next, please. Right now, the code audit that I'm working on is looking at your zoning ordinance 95-4. Also street improvement standards, since these are these can be very effective or not toward making middle housing work. So we're going to look at how those might be barriers and how we can fix them, and subdivision standards and procedures. Next. Some of the tools that I use in this work are, we look at dimensional standards specifically. For example, the table on the far right is a list of dimensional standards. And this is where kind of a form-based code aspect comes into being in the project. I'm actually an architect by training, by registration, and I'm very, very interested in the form of the code amendments, the form that they produce in your town, your village, and the form of middle housing, the form that it takes ultimately, is of great interest to me. So one of the things that I look at first is what are all the dimensional standards in your ordinance, and what form are they creating? What's the site relationship, building to parking? Issues of compatibility or appropriateness, land availability and suitability, and different development types that more or less lend themselves to different contexts. So one of the outcomes of this phase will actually be a table format for all of your residential zones that lists side by side in kind of the way that orange table, which is too small for you to read, but just take my word for it. It's actually listing for a city all of the zoning designations and their different dimensions side by side. For people like the ones, me and the people on the Planning Commission, that helps us visualize much more quickly how to compare the different zoning designation outcomes to each other. So it's a very form-based approach, and my recommendation would be that this table format makes its way into the hearings ready code amendments so that we don't just go back to the narrative listing. So that's a little technical detail, but I thought I would share that since form-based code issues came up. We'll also be looking at the comprehensive plan policies as we go and how they more or less support housing. Next. So there are some inspirations that I'm using, and I'll talk about this more in coming slides. There are already some good examples of middle housing in Manzanita. One is the classic street cottages, and another that's not built yet, but that I've studied quite a bit, is the Third and Lanita mixed-use project. And I'm showing the publication on the far left, the Housing Choices Guidebook, which is a book that's available on the Department of Land Conservation and Development website. Since 2018, I authored that book. I'm kind of obsessed with middle housing, and I took it upon myself to create a catalog of housing types under a DLCD contract several years ago, and it's extremely popular. A lot of people have gotten copies of it either in print or online and studied the middle housing types that are represented in there. It preceded House Bill 2001 by a few years, and many of the examples in it are not statutorily required by the House bill. So we're going to talk about them because they're still middle housing types that you may want to consider above and beyond what the House bill requires. Next. So I want to go into middle housing a little bit in detail and explain it, because it can be misunderstood, and it's kind of good for us to all be on the same page in terms and in understanding. So if we could go to the next slide. Middle housing is a term that refers to, if you picture housing forms or types as a spectrum, and in this diagram that you see here, if on the left you have apartments that they're out of the picture, but imagine more boxy flats inside of a stacked structure, sometimes on top of a retail base, or sometimes not, just a freestanding or standalone residential apartment building. And then on the far right, again, out of the picture slightly, are more conventional single dwellings sitting on lots with yards around them, back, front, side yards, detached, owned, fee simple. And what middle housing refers to is all of the housing types that are in between those two things. And all these varieties may share some of the aspects of the apartments on the one hand, in terms of compactness, or that they're owned in condominium ownership, or they're rented instead of owned fee simple. And some of these middle housing types actually share attributes of the conventional single dwelling, that they do sit on their own lot, like a row house or a townhouse. And if we could go to the next slide, please. So tenure is a big issue when we talk about middle housing, because some of these you can own, some of them you can own and then you can rent them to other people. some of these housing types you can only rent unless they're condominiumized, or unless they're actually subdivided into a smaller lot, which is another piece of work that the city may undertake at a future phase. It wouldn't be part of this project, but there is a new ordinance, new Oregon revised statutes that allow cities to create a middle housing expedited land division procedure. That's like a simplified subdivision process that would allow you, say, to take a duplex lot and divide it into 2 lots so they could be owned. But tenure is a big issue when we're talking about middle housing. I think it's important to be able to distinguish between things that can be owned and rented and condominiumized or owned in cooperative ownership or owned by a land trust and then created for affordable housing in a deed restricted arrangement. So these are all really important, but kind of complicated topics. I'm not going to get into that a lot more this evening, just to say that within the range of middle housing, there are many, many possibilities. It's kind of a whole world of creativity exists within this realm. Next. But it's kind of odd that this whole realm of middle housing, which used to be extremely common everywhere in the US, in cities, towns, neighborhoods, villages, was made mostly illegal after World War II by things like parking requirements that were kind of a one-size-fits-all, or by the conventional single-dwelling zoning that also segregated apartments into a separate multi-dwelling zone and created kind of a binary system of zoning. That's why it's called missing middle housing a lot. But the thing about middle housing that's also important to know is that it's when it works, when it's allowed, it provides a lot of different choices for people in different stages and phases of life. And it also integrates those housing choices all together rather than segregating them into monocultural zones. And I want to lastly say that the term middle housing doesn't refer to affordability per se, but middle housing does tend to be more affordable because it's compact and more dense than conventional single dwellings are. Next. So which ones of these types, although on the left are, I'll just run down from the top, they're kind of a total catalog of the housing types that exist in the middle housing realm. They are row house or townhouse. These are attached, sit on their own lots, but they're attached on the side. Then there's a narrow lot house, which is just a row house sized lot, but with a detached house on it. There are cottages and cottage clusters. Cottages can be by themselves or they can be in clusters. And I think everybody at this point knows what an accessory dwelling unit is. It's a secondary dwelling on the same lot as a main primary dwelling. A plex, it could be duplex, triplex, or quadplex. These could be separated buildings on the same lot or in the same building or a combination. And then people, I think, know about these courtyard apartments. They're somewhat rare in modern times, partly because of parking, but they're a very familiar housing type built a lot in the 1920s and existing in many cities. And then there's the standalone apartment building or the multi-dwelling. And then there's the upper story housing, which sits on top of mixed use. Of these types, the ones that we will be required to change your zoning code to allow are the ADUs, the duplexes, triplexes, and quadplexes or plexes, cottage clusters, and townhouses. And I'm using the statutory name here that the state uses for these types. So those little icons that are marked with orange are the ones that we'll be writing the zoning code to allow. So the way this works is the Senate Bill 1051, which was passed some time ago, 20 teens, required cities with a population of certain amount or a county amount, a population amount to build ADUs, to allow ADUs, and to allow them without a parking requirement, without a design review requirement, and without an owner occupancy requirement. So we'll need to amend your your zoning code to allow that. House Bill 2001, which passed in 2019, requires all medium and large size cities to allow duplexes, triplexes, quadplexes, cottage clusters, and townhouses on any zone any lot that is zoned for residential use. This does include some mixed use zones. And you may think, well, that was House Bill 2001. But then along comes Senate Bill 406, which says that Tillamook County cities, regardless of size, will be treated the same as medium to large cities through House Bill 2001. So these are what I call the have to do's. And next, I'd like to talk about the things that you may want to do. Next slide, please. And we'll come back to this later, but one of the things you may want to do is allow some greater latitude in the way that cottage clusters are regulated. Per the House Bill 2001, they're rather strict in terms of size and number. And looking at your own classic street cottages, I can see that it doesn't meet them all. It's not a strictly complying House Bill example, but it's a beloved example. And I think it's one that we may want to look at kind of creating room for. And another is housing types that aren't mentioned at all in House Bill 2001, like single room occupancy or tiny homes. Another has more to do with kind of tracts, creation of tracts and subdivisions, or the creation of common greens or other kind of common areas that are public tracts, and maybe looking at how those could be made possible for other housing besides just cottage clusters. I've also studied classic street cottages and a lot of other developments around Oregon to know enough that alleys and skinny streets really help middle housing work better. And many cities have to amend their street standards or alley standards to do better on that count. Also, above and beyond, the middle housing is looking at provisions for 3-story apartment buildings or woody walk-ups. These housing types are really, really important right now. They're getting a lot of the LIFT funding from the state to be developed, and they provide a lot of affordable housing, workforce and affordable housing. And then lastly, looking at some things that might actually serve as neighborhood hubs and provide housing at the same time. I think the 3rd and Lanita project is a really interesting project, and some of the zoning changes that we're going to make to parking could make those types of projects more feasible in more locations. So the question with this list is, we'll come back to it at the end, is the list complete? Are there more things on here? If you have reservations about these items, it'd be good to start to bring that up now. Or maybe the reservations have more to do with like where do these things, where would it be appropriate to have some of these above and beyond amendments. Next. So I just want to spend a minute, you can go to the next slide too, just talking about why middle housing is a good thing. And adding middle housing to your town does create a lot more resiliency to respond to housing trends that tend to change. Demographic shifts and trends, for example, households have been shrinking for the last several decades, and yet housing or dwellings, homes, have not been getting smaller, they've been getting bigger, mostly because it's very difficult to build small. So you're better serving smaller household sizes when you have a range of housing. At the same time, you can serve multi-generational living arrangements much better when you have things like ADUs or even a plex. New households forming, we're seeing people can't buy homes, they're too expensive. Also, aging households downsizing can't move out of their housing because there's not housing that's appropriate for aging. So we're kind of in this stuck place where new households forming can't buy housing because aging people can't move out, partly because there's not a lot of choice of housing out there. And then last this is by no means a complete list, but middle housing does also address people that have been left out of homeownership opportunities and the opportunity to build wealth and equity through owning a home. And in the 2010, for the city that Layla used to work for, Milwaukee, I did a little housing profiles. I'm not going to read through this. I'll let you read through these on your own. But these were, these and a few more that are shown in subsequent slides, are some of the living arrangements and household types that we profiled in order to help build more empathy toward this type of housing. It is a more dense kind of housing, and a lot of people have a knee-jerk reaction to density. But when you start to think about providing more choice and the fact that you yourself might want this choice in your town, I find it's a better way to talk to people about housing density. So if we could go to the next slide. And, we are finding in reports like housing needs analyses that are being done all over the state that the housing that exists in most municipalities doesn't meet the needs of the population there. We also have people tell us directly that the housing in their town doesn't meet their needs. And I'm showing you a picture of a survey that was done for North Plains several years ago. We did community engagement there to talk to specific small groups, specifically about middle housing, and kind of help people understand what kind of housing serves you at different points in your life. We had people take surveys like this one, which asks people to respond to what kind of housing would be appropriate to you when you're first buying, or when you have a family, or later when you're older. And it's interesting to have people really think through that for themselves. This was a 8-person response here, and it was part of a broader campaign. And it's one thing I'm kind of interested to know from this group is, would such a survey be helpful in this project as part of the broader community outreach? Next. So as I mentioned, for Milwaukee in 2010, I wrote several other profiles about different kinds of living arrangements and the different kinds of middle housing that would serve these arrangements better. And I won't go through them right now, but we could talk about, if we could go through the next slide and land on middle housing typology. So I want to talk about the housing types that you're required to provide by legislation. And before I get into that, I'll just pause and see if anybody has questions about what I've just presented. Okay, Bert.
Hi, Marcy. Good to see you.
That's nice to see you.
Yeah, just so that everybody understands, is that the majority of the city actually is duplex zoned, allowing single family on those lots. And so most of the zones actually are residentially zoned lots. And so I think what you're saying is that any lot in the city that currently allows residential use would be subject to this particular need, or the way to satisfy this need for middle housing. Is that correct?
That's correct. And which housing types you are required to allow, say a duplex versus a quadplex, will come down to the size of the lot in that zone. And this, we'll get into this in more detail in the work itself, but just know that if it's zoned residential, we'll have to look at how to accommodate middle housing on it in one way or another, whether it's just a duplex or whether it's a larger lot and therefore it's a quadplex and a cottage cluster. And also we'll have to look at how to allow subdivisions for townhouses, which can be smaller than your minimum lot size typically is.
Yes, the minimum lot size typically in Manzanita is 5,000 square feet, and so that's a pretty large lot. Right. So, okay, that's great. Just clarify it for everybody.
Yeah, thanks for that question. Tom.
Thank you for the presentation. I just wanted to say I see and appreciate all of the benefits you described to more housing types. generally throughout the country, but I think especially in Manzanita, which is largely a vacation and a retirement community, going through a process of pretty rapid price appreciation. And we run the risk of becoming like so other many communities, an Aspen, a Steamboat Springs, places where if you just let the market run, we are going to end up with, a monoculture here and a community that is not diverse demographically. And we will, we can't let that cow get out of barn. I think we're at a point here where we need to do something about it. And the key to that is, at the very least, allowing more and more varied forms of housing so that we can have more and diverse community. So I'm all gung ho for this, which leads me to one question though. In your presentation, you sort of left out courtyard apartments as something to consider allowing. And in the neighborhood I live in Portland, there are, the surrounding neighborhoods mostly, there are a lot of courtyard apartments, and they are very popular, especially for, single people, young women, widows and the like, because there's the community living arrangement. And I haven't noticed in the areas where they have it that there's any sort of associated parking problems. So I'm kind of curious why you left that out of something to consider.
Only waiting for someone else to bring it up and say, let's talk about that too. So if I think it's a good housing type, and I don't think if we were to pass rules, if we were to amend your zoning code, your ordinance, to allow all the different required middle housing types, we would not allow that one type. So it's an above and beyond housing type that we could look at while we're engaged in this process. And if there's interest in that, I think we should. I agree with you. It's a really good housing type and can be extremely compact. It's basically kind of like a cottage cluster, but it's attached and can be much smaller than a cottage cluster. May not require the same amount of common green as the statutorily defined cottage cluster does per House Bill 2001, but it's an extremely financially feasible form of housing to build, especially if you don't require parking. And it's kind of nice because it has typically have a front door and a back door. I mean, it's like having a little house that's an apartment sized, but in a kind of community, like you say.
Yeah.
So if there's interest,
there is
okay,
here.
Okay.
It's one person.
John.
Question, Marcy. We've talked a lot about minimum lot sizes and smaller houses. Have at the state level or in any of your discussions with any government or quasi-government people or groups, has there been any discussion about maximum lot size? Because in Manzanita, we have had recently several single-family residences built where they've combined two 5,000 square foot lots and built a 4,500 square foot single-family house, which to me seems somewhat antithetical to what we're trying to achieve with the state, to comply with the state law. And I'm just going to throw that out there because I'm curious. Is 5,000, 6,000 square feet We call it a minimum, but it's a minimum with multiple things that can be done on the lot. Should we even consider a maximum? Again, I'm throwing that out there for discussion with the group. And just to throw my own 2 cents worth in, I agree with Tom about the courtyard apartments and certainly the mixed use, similar to the 3rd and Lanita Street, I think great use. And I have some thoughts on that when it comes to short-term rental as well, but be that as it may, throwing that out there for the group.
Well, if I could just say that this is something we can talk about more. I am aware of a number of ways that cities are dealing with just this issue. I mean, I'm doing a multi-year code, top to bottom code amendments rewrite for the city of Cannon Beach, and I'm pretty familiar with these large lots and also the short-term rental issues, by the way, but also second homes issue, and what it's like to be a coastal community struggling with getting more housing. But to your point specifically about should there be a maximum lot size, I haven't actually heard that rule as much as I've heard 2 other things that cities are doing. And one of those is requiring a minimum density on a lot. So if we peg, say, a 7,000 square foot lot is the one that you would allow quadplexes and cottage clusters on, that's you would require that development on a 7,000 square foot lot produce a minimum of 4 units, say. I mean, that's one way. It seems, it can seem radical, but some cities are doing that. And then another is to limit the floor area ratio. Now, I don't think we use floor area ratio in Manzanita, but other cities do, or they have instituted that practice in order to limit the amount that can be used for a dwelling. And you get more back if you provide more dwellings, say. And in most cities that kind of got their zoning codes set up at a one-size-fits-all period in the 60s or 70s. I don't know the history of Manzanita zoning yet, but what happens is if you just go by setbacks and height, you have a lot of development capacity built into that massing. And most cities for decades, they never saw it taken advantage of. But now, especially if you're a coastal city, your highly desirable location, people are building to that maximum building envelope. So cities are kind of coming back and saying, well, let's look at what should the maximum size of a dwelling be? Let's limit it through floor area ratio. So those are 2 things that we could look at. Anything else? Okay, then let's go through these housing types, the ones that are required first. I'm going to refer to this book. I mentioned it earlier. There's going to be a 2nd edition out in October. And I now have kind of collected, studied, and dated more than 50 examples of middle housing all over. It happens that 2 of them that are going to be in this new catalog are in Manzanita. They are Classic Street Cottages and the 3rd and Lanita project. Here's a link to this, the site of the orange version. The blue version, the new 2nd edition, will be out, as I mentioned, in October. So many of the images that I'm going to refer to and some of the data about density and lot size I'm using from this book. So next slide, please. So what a townhouse, let's just start with the townhouse is one of the housing types that you're going to be required to incorporate. The density for these can be highly variable so that you can have small two clusters of 2 townhouses that look like a house. That can be a townhouse. And that might be more appropriate mixed into some more edge neighborhoods, whereas you can also have a long row of townhouses on a main street. So townhouses are a very variable housing type. In the catalog that I've put together, we find them up down to as low as 20 and as high as 45 dwelling units per acre. They're typically on lots of 2,500 square feet, but they can be on lots that are slightly smaller. And the House bill name is townhouse, not row house. And the townhouse definition is that it's 2 or more attached dwelling units, each located on an individual lot and sharing at least one common wall. And these are, in terms of tenure, they're typically owned, but they can be owned and then rented out. But because they are fee simple, they're very much like a conventional house. Next. Couple of examples, 4 examples that I pulled out of the catalog. On the left, those are actually townhouses in Orenco. And on the right, it's actually something that I think you might want to consider, which is the skinny house or the narrow house. It's a lot as small as a townhouse lot, but detached. And in order to allow this type of house, we would have to adopt rules that are a little different. We would adopt the townhouse rules plus some additional rules to allow this type. So that's just something to think about. Next. So cottages and cottage clusters, very interesting housing type. I think when people were talking about, Tom, I think you were talking about the courtyard housing. It's very similar to cottage cluster. But for whatever reason, the House Bill 2001 implemented a change for cities to allow detached cottages. And so the definition of this housing type is groupings of no fewer than 4 detached housing units, and they must be have a footprint of less than 900 square feet each, although they can have an upper story and they can be an average of, I think it's 1,200. These are also hugely variable. They can be as small as 5 dwelling units per acre. As low a density as 5 or as many as 35. And they fit on a lot of different lot sizes, from a small infill lot to a very large edge lot. They're really great housing type for clustering around natural resources or trees or on a hilly site. So next, I pulled a couple of examples from the catalog to show you. And one of those, as you can see on the lower left, is the classic street cottages. But there are also some that are attached in the catalog here. And I think there are also some that are very small and detached without a common courtyard, like Cannon Beach has a set in the catalog. It's 4 small 800 square foot, 1-story units that sit on a 5,000 square foot lot, and there's no common courtyard. And yet it's I think it's a really desirable type of housing, but it would not be allowed by House Bill 2001. So it might be something that we want to add additional provisions to allow. Next. So accessory dwelling units, again, highly variable. And when we talk density here, we're really just talking about doubling the density of the base zone. There's a couple of examples in the catalog of very large lot accessory dwelling units. And as you know, these are mostly rented, although I do want to mention that if any of you track the small housing movement, there's a fair this week or next that in Seattle around ADUs, where people are going to be talking about condominiumization of ADUs. So that may change in the future, that an accessory dwelling unit can actually be owned more commonly. Next. So a couple of examples from the catalog here. As you can see from the images here, but you probably know this yourself, that garages can be a garage that's retrofitted. So example on the lower left is a Seaside garage on a very large lot in the city of Seaside, and it's a 1-level ADA accessible unit that's been built into an existing garage. So they gave up the parking function of the garage and have a residence there instead. On the upper right is a ADU that actually sits on the street, and on the lower right is one in the backyard. These are more common, but they can also be above a house or below a house. So there's many, many ways to build ADUs. Next. And lastly is the plexes that I'm going to talk about. So I'm mixing duplex, triplex, quadplex all into the same bunch here, but they are, we'll have to make sure that we allow for all three of those types in order to meet House Bill 2001. But these are also very variable. They can be large lots, small lots, high density, low density. The rule is that they're a configuration of 2, 3, or 4 detached or attached on one lot. So they sit on one lot. That means they're typically rented. But again, that can change with condominiumization. And the examples that I chose here on the next slide are, as you can see on the upper left, an example in Newport of plexes that are pretty tightly packed on a site with no parking. This was a workforce housing project that's in Nye Beach, and I think it's really successful. And then on the lower right is another example that was built on church property because of allowed through more state legislation that allows churches to use property for housing. These were modular units that were brought in to make duplexes in a kind of landscaped parking court configuration. So it's not a cottage court, but it's a senior housing all on one level. Also very successful project for affordability. And then the other two types, as you can see, upper left, upper right, are more conventional looking housing. So what I found in my studies is that the plexes seem to be yielding the greatest affordability for cities, and they seem to be a type that people are taking advantage of the most. So let's talk about parking for a moment. House Bill 2001 does have parking mandates in it, and they are, I'll just break it down for you. You can only require 1 parking space per dwelling. You may allow more if the developer elects to provide that. However, some cities have gone as far as also establishing a maximum parking. That's optional. You may allow other parking locations to count. So allowing parking on the street to count toward parking that is required. So the way these compare to how you currently deal with parking in your residential zones is, as I understand it, you currently require 2 spaces per dwelling unit, and parking must be located on the same lot as the dwelling. Well, we will need to change those 2 things. And it's kind of important to know about middle housing. All the types that we've talked about are successful because
she's very good.
They're successful because they don't require parking as much as conventional housing does. And therefore, they're more physically and financially feasible. So the modern parking requirements that most cities have in their codes today, where it's 2 parking spaces per dwelling, or even sometimes it's 1 per bedroom, or these were mostly suburban housing standards that were brought in as a one-size-fits-all parking, an answer to parking problems that cities were having, but they're not customized to your local environment. And I think you should want to change these and take a good look at your parking requirements. Relief from parking requirements that makes housing more feasible means that you either the required number of spaces is less, or the required location of residential parking is flexible. So you allow it on the street, or you allow it down the street, or you allow shared parking. Okay, so we're getting to the end. I'd like to return to the want to do's list and maybe have a discussion more about what you'd like to see on that list. First of all, is the list complete? Are there more votes to include courtyard housing, and are there places where you think these things you'd like to look at them further, but you're concerned about that they may be only appropriate in certain types of locations? So yeah, if you could share share your thoughts with me on this slide. And this is the last part of my presentation.
I'm going to jump in and go first. I agree with Tom that the courtyard type development would be feasible here and desirable even, especially because we have so many elderly or retired people, and that little added benefit of safety seems like it would be something that we should encourage. We already have a lot of skinny streets, so I think that's a reasonable kind of thing. I worry a little bit about the buildings that are 3 stories and taller, because we do like the light and air that comes with development that has a little bit more space. So that I would be concerned about, for example, putting a 3-story type apartment building where all of the other homes are very small. But that's where I am. That's where I'm thinking right now. I do like the mixed use developments. We've done quite a few of those, and they seem very popular. But the main thing is that we just need to be able to get people who work here the ability to live here. We're not a good community unless we have that. So I'm really thrilled that we're forced to do this work, but that we're able to do it is a bonus as well. So with that, I'll be quiet.
Thank you, Karen. That's very helpful. I can't tell who had their hand up first. That John?
Well, I'll just jump in. We've had some discussion with at least one group, possibly 2, regarding more low-cost housing, and which, to be feasible, sort of requires fairly significant density and possibly the 3-story woody walk-up type of development. And I'm a little bit in disagreement with Karen, only in the sense that I don't think this is something you want to put in the middle of an established neighborhood of either single family or duplexes or such. But I think we have a location proposed by one of the groups, and it's probably a reasonable location to do that because it's near the edge of the urban growth boundary, at least currently. And I would like to, the Planning Commission was fairly enthusiastic about the project when they brought it to us. We haven't approved anything specific, and we really couldn't because we had no way of doing that. They weren't ready for it, and we didn't have any kind of zoning option to do that. But I just throw it out to the group that it should be something we at least consider, just because the group seemed enthusiastic about the cost of the housing, and that kind of density works for that. Anyway.
Yeah, thank you. That's helpful. Tom.
Yes, and I'll be quick because I'm sorry, I need to leave here, and I hope we still retain a quorum when I do. As I said before, I am in favor of all types of housing. I think the more diverse housing, the better, because it will increase the diversity of our demographics. That doesn't mean that I'm in favor of every type of housing everywhere. I think we need to, some things will go better in some neighborhoods than others. But I want to see as many types as possible, all that you've described, and maybe some that we haven't even thought of yet. The one last thing that I want to say is changing the rules to allow different types of housing doesn't mean that it's going to get built. I live in a neighborhood in Portland that is all single family homes. And so it is all expensive dwellings. And as a consequence, it is all the same type of people. It's mostly white families of a certain affluence. I'm hoping that there is some way in this process that we can not only just allow other types of housing, but we can incentivize it some way, that we can build something into our code so that when we say we want to have townhomes, cluster cottages, courtyard apartments, that we can make that feasible and incentivize developers to build it. Otherwise, you're just going to end up with rules allowing everything, and it doesn't ever happen, and we continue on with the same type of housing we have. Sorry, I got a wedding to run to. I really appreciate the presentation. Thank you for coming.
You, Paul.
Bye, everyone.
Great. Lee.
Hi, Marcy. Thank you for this presentation. It's been helpful, and I hope that you continue to work with everybody and establish some great work. The city of Portland did some amazing things when they started allowing 25-foot lots, narrow lots. Narrow housing looks like conventional housing, except it's a little bit narrower, but it still meets setbacks. It still meets the fire code. I see that as a workable solution. Obviously, all these are going to be allowed by the Senate bill, which is fine. But I think that from a workability standpoint and a living standpoint, that narrow housing might fit the bill better than some of these others. ADUs also work, but as Tom pointed out, we have limited availability of sites where that will work unless we reduce setbacks and fire standards, which I'm not in favor of at all. But I think that there's opportunity there to work some ADUs in, probably more in existing buildings, like you pointed out the garage earlier, or maybe in an upper level of a home, or maybe a small addition that could be incorporated into some of the existing footprint. And so ADUs are a workable solution. I'm a little curious how you view these plexes. Does that mean that the floor area ratios are going to have to change in order to allow these, say a fourplex on a single family lot? So I'll leave that to you to answer that. And thank you again for your presentation.
Welcome, Lee. Thank you. I'll just answer how I know that the city of Portland still reduced their floor area ratio, and it's still even reduced. It allows a quadplex, for example. So just to say that most cities, as I mentioned, their floor area ratios allow very, very, very a lot of dwelling space. And we'll be, if people are interested, we'll look at floor area ratio as a potential mechanism, say for limiting the total amount of residential on a lot. That's a way of addressing the maximum lot size issue, but in a floor area ratio method, which I think is a little simpler to maybe it's more legal, perhaps. We'll have to look into this. What else was I going to say? Sorry about that. The quadplexes on a single lot, I find that a lot of developers, home builders, developers, property owners, people who are just developing their own property as a quadplex are taking advantage of that because there's no land division required. It's a super simple procedurally. And whether it's a duplex, triplex, or quadplex, you're using the same piece of land but getting more but smaller dwellings on it. But the dwellings they're not micro dwellings. We're not talking about substandard dwellings here. They're still regular sized homes. So I find that people are seeing that as a big solution. Let's see, Bert, you were next.
Yeah, it's good stuff. I think this image in front of us, of course, we do need to do that. And so I would agree with Tom that it's trying to figure out where it's appropriate, and then as well as what the heck does it look like? And so I look at these images, and there are some buildings under construction now that appear as big as these, and these are single family houses. And so the aspect of a form-based code can get to the issue associated with scale and sensitivity and things like that. So I very much encourage that to happen. As Manzanita exists with a duplex on a 5,000 square foot lot, that ends up being about 17 units an acre, just for a comparison here. And so really what we're trying to do here, I think, is to give more flexibility to the granularity of the kinds of housing that can occur in Manzanita, and allow for different scales and different sizes and different affordability stuff within the city. And that texture can be very exciting and really, really, really nice. In my neighborhood, where I used to live in Seattle, a lot of small houses that have been actually torn down, and 3 or 4 units of very compatible housing has come into that neighborhood with all sorts of different scales of prices. So I think it's a tremendous opportunity. One important observation I would make, and this is something that Marcy, I think you'll need to really take a hard look at, is that Manzanita currently doesn't have alleys, and that's a missing ingredient actually in our transportation and street standards. And probably alleys will only be able to be achieved in some of the urban growth area, I'm guessing. Maybe there'll be some other areas where that could be achieved. And so as you take a look at these different types of housing typologies, the integration with the parking, of course, is going to be very significant. And, I don't think we want to end up with garage door streets that all we see is garage doors. Many of the images that you had were really wonderful buildings, but the parking wasn't a garage door. And then you kind of, what's known as snout houses, it's a garage door, and then there's a little tiny walkway to a door. And so that kind of character, I don't think is going to be appropriate with Manzanita. But so we have to figure out, well, how do we do that? How do we accommodate the needs for parking, but not end up driving it to a place that we're not going to be very happy with? I think street parking could be one of those solutions. Anyway, it's very exciting. I do agree with Tom a little bit about the maybe in the code there's incentive somehow for to encourage certain things that for a developer, for instance, might be more profitable, but helps move the needle a little bit towards what the needs are. And so, yeah, I mean, shoot, can't get staff in our restaurants because they can't afford to live anywhere close to Manzanita. Anyway, very exciting.
Thank you, Bert. Those are great, several suggestions and things to keep in mind as we go forward. The challenge of parking in a city that doesn't have alleys, but yeah, you could see alleys in the urban growth boundary areas. Anyway, thank you for that. Great information. John.
Yeah, Bert just hit on part of the question that I wanted to ask you, and that had to do with incentivizing density on our standard 5,000 square foot lot or whatever it ends up being. And I thought I heard you mention earlier that in using, and maybe like variable FARs, if you go more units on a lot, your FAR increases.
Right. Graduated FAR.
And as an incentivized idea, that seems, I'm sure you've heard of it and used it before. Do you have any other ideas, or have you seen any other ways that cities have incentivized increasing density on small lots and decrease that? And also the flip side of that, which is my issue with the McBeach houses that have been popping up.
I'd like to say that the graduated FAR, the kind of ratcheting down the FAR and then giving back for additional units, that does seem to work pretty well. But also the parking, changing the parking requirements actually is a huge incentive to this kind of housing. One of the reasons you may not be seeing, say, cities might change their zoning codes tomorrow to allow duplexes or ADUs, but they don't change. In fact, I'd say you're probably in the situation where you allow ADUs, but you still require parking for them. When the city of Portland changed their parking requirements for ADUs, also they eliminated systems development charges. That's another thing I should mention. It's a huge incentive. They saw overnight like a huge increase in accessory dwelling units that were built. That was in the 2010s. So that's another thing that you could look at if that's possible. Another incentive would be actually trying to make sites available to, say, community land trusts and seeking out affordable housing developers and trying to make land available to them. That's not using zoning or reliefs from certain zoning requirements as an incentive. It's a different kind of where you're taking an active role in getting affordable housing built. So I would say you'd want to look at that too. And we probably want to look at that when we're looking at where are Woody walk-ups going to be appropriate? Where are they acceptable, say? Karen.
Hi there. I just wanted to add one thing. We did a considerable amount of community outreach around ADUs and put together some concepts that we thought would work for us, but because our zoning ordinance does not allow ADUs inside the city at this moment, we talked about them as far as the urban growth boundary areas go, and we have never instituted those concepts into our ordinance. And so I'm hoping that you could take a look at what the work we've already done on that, and whether it is all usable anymore. I don't know. I don't know how it fits with how the laws have changed, but we have that material somewhere, and I think we could get a jump start on that kind of work if we look at what we've already thought was workable.
Okay.
We might. I don't know if you've already tracked that down. I think it was even done before Layla came on board. So we've got it somewhere. And if you need help finding it, I will help you find it.
I'm sure.
Okay.
Layla will help, and if necessary, she'll reach out to you. But now this doesn't have to do with the short-term rental issue, which I know you're also looking at the short-term rental issue, right?
Yes.
There's a separate committee looking at that issue, and
yes,
we'll want to coordinate with that as we go. Yeah, I'll find out more. Thank you for bringing this up. For a lot of cities, the accessory dwelling units are problematic, or there may be a pause on them because the short-term rental is being paused. And I'm not sure if that's the case
Yeah, the determination that we came up with was that the point of an ADU was to increase available housing long term. And so we had talked about not allowing an ADU to be used as a short-term rental. That the purpose was either a caregiver in home or, that where somebody should live there full time.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks, Karen. Just want to mention for the group too that short-term rentals is definitely going to be a continuing component of this conversation. I would imagine that if we're interested in increasing these types of housing, we'll want to look at limiting their use as short-term rentals. And we can do that at the same time that we're rewriting the code. I've learned that your short-term rental provisions are not in your zoning code, or sorry, in your ordinance. They're in a separate licensing chapter article of your municipal code. So that makes it a little easier for us. Some cities have their accessory dwelling units licensing permissions are right in the zoning code, and we have to surgically change that, but that's not the case for you. Okay, I see more hands up, and I know we have other things to cover. So, Scott, do you want to?
Marcy, thank you, and everyone on the commission. I really appreciate the conversation. Wonderful presentation, and I think this is a great direction for our team as we move forward. I'm really excited that you're very open to options, even if maybe they don't end up being in the ordinance, but just discussing them is important. So many cities we work with are just like, no, we just want to do what's required. But this is neat that you're open to exploring the possibilities of making the community what you really feel it should be. So excellent, good conversation.
Yeah, thanks everybody.
I only have about a 5-minute set of slides here. I want to just talk with you all about kind of where we're going with the comprehensive plan, what we've done, and kind of the next steps, just so we can keep you involved and have you up to speed with what we're up to. Now, you're a different group. I always, you know what a comprehensive plan is. You've worked on the vision, but I'll just cover this quickly just so we can get it out there so everyone knows what it is. Your comp plan is your guiding vision for growth over the next 20, 30 years. It lays out your policies, it lays out your actions, it lays out your future land use map. All those different things become your comprehensive plan. The process we've laid out really starts with a background report. So we're working on that now. What are the existing conditions? What do we have? What is Manzanita today? We learn about that in terms of demographics, geography, economics, transportation, all those wonderful topic areas that we cover in the comprehensive plan. So we'll look at that background report. And then also, what's the vision for the future? Now, you've already done that visioning, a lot of that. We're hoping to kind of finalize that visioning through the fall, and have kind of a vision statement and a vision set for the comprehensive plan. So as we work through the planning process, we can kind of go back to that vision and say, hey, is this really matching that vision? Is it really moving us in that direction? So that's kind of the first 2 steps that we're going to do, is that background report and then finalize the vision. Then we move into goals and policies, and that's kind of how you get there. What are the policies that we need to have in the plan? Some of those policies are kind of maybe already done. For example, a lot of your transportation policies will borrow straight from the TSP, for example. But again, if there's additional ones, we can add those too. So those policies, how do we get there? What are those? And then the action plan is, how do you make it happen? What are the dance steps to get you those actions? So that's the meat of the plan. Each chapter of the comp plan will have goals, policies, and actions. And that's really important to get you there. All of those things come together to become your comp plan: the vision, the reports, the goals and policies, your action plan, and your future land use map. We haven't discussed this yet, but it may be that we have the zoning map and the future land use map are one and the same. A lot of these cities are going to one map system, so you don't have a comp plan map and a zoning map. It may be that we do have a comp plan map and a zoning map, but something we will discuss as we move through this. I'm a map guy, so that's always important to me to figure that out. And in terms of community engagement, so we've done a community engagement plan. We've drafted it. It's actually available on the project website. I'll show you that website. But it's, of course, as you know, we are not going to be successful unless we have representatives from the entire community. And that actually goes beyond your city limits, frankly, because there's a lot of people that should be involved in this planning process that might not live in the city limits. As you've already mentioned, some of the folks that work in Manzanita may live 10, 15 minutes out. So, it's also kind of a region that we're looking at, not just the city, in terms of public involvement. The goals and policies will guide the growth. And this includes housing. We had a good discussion on housing, but I think because we're starting with housing, the beginning of this plan is going to really focus on that housing discussion. I think, this is going to be very inclusive and transparent. Everything we do, all the products we create will be available on the website. That's why we have the advisory committee to help us. That's why we're going to be briefing you as a commission. That's why we're going to have large community events and surveys and things throughout the process. And of course, the comp plan needs to reflect that vision. The community engagement plan's supposed to inform people. They need to know what we're doing, right? But it's also going to educate them. A lot of people don't know why we're doing a comp plan. How does that affect me? What is that? So we have to educate them on that. We're going to be asking them things. We're going to consult with them. We want them to understand how decisions are made and how they can help us make those decisions. And then also partnering with agency representatives, the state, Tillamook County, the Tillamook, I'm thinking of the tourist board and things like that. So any agencies we need to partner with, that's going to be important. And if you all find that we're missing an agency, please let us know. We want to make sure we involve everyone who we need to. And then also just reaching a diverse stakeholders who, and I mentioned this already, but that greater community, who are those diverse stakeholders that we're going to reach through the engagement plan? So it's super important to have good community engagement. When I started this presentation earlier, I talked about the 4 phases, and you saw those 4 summits at the bottom of that schedule. And we've really organized this process around doing specific chapters in 4 specific rounds. So this first one, number 1, is round 1, and we're saying it starts fall this year, and we're going to focus on housing and the housing ordinance, which is goal 10. We mentioned that earlier. That came up. Citizen involvement, which is outreach, our engagement plan, for example, and then natural resources, scenic and historic areas, and open space. So the first phase is kind of going to focus on those topic areas. Then come next spring, we're going to start looking at goal 2, land use, goal 13, energy, 14, urbanization, 11, public facilities and services, and 10, which is draft. Oh, that's not the right number. Anyway, that's the wrong number. But anyway, sorry.
It is the right number.
Sorry.
It is the right number. We'll be giving you updates on Marcy's process. So as we go through each phase, we will be talking about new chapters and goals, but Marcy will still be working. So until that is those ordinance amendments are kind of adoption ready, you will also be getting goal 10 updates in terms of what's happening with that process.
Thanks, Violet. And I also realized it also happens in the next round as well.
Yes, it'll keep happening. So again, until we get to adoption ready ordinance, and I think that's supposed to be towards the end of the fiscal year.
Exactly. So yeah, end of the fiscal year for round 3. So that community engagement, round 3, economic development, recreation needs, and again, having that adoption ready ordinance so we can get that done under the time frame. And then finally, the 4th round, which will be fall of next year, about a year from now, we'll be looking at air, water, and land resource quality, natural hazards, and then all of the coastal and beach shorelines, 17, 18, 19, coastal shorelines, beaches and dunes, and ocean resources will kind of be what we rounded out with. So this is not how typically we do these. I have to say, this is a unique way to set up a project. I'm really liking it. Most cities I've worked with take on all the chapters at once. And what happens is some of those topics kind of get lost. So putting this into chunks where we can really go out to the community and focus on specific topic areas is going to be a neat way to look at this rather than trying to do everything all at once. So I'm happy with this and hope you think it's a good way to move forward. In terms of the community engagement plan, I mentioned this already, but we have the Project Advisory Steering Committee. We will be doing stakeholder interviews. We'll be doing those big community workshops or summits. You might hear that word interchanged with workshop or summit. Again, briefings with you all and the city council. We have a webpage. We're going to be doing surveys. At the end, we will produce an outreach report that kind of grades ourselves on how well we did with our public outreach based on our public outreach plan. So a reflection of how well we did, maybe what we learned we could do better. And we can leave that so that maybe next time we'll know how to do outreach better. So reflecting on that's important. So that's kind of the pieces of the engagement plan we'll use. I mentioned the project website. We've done some branding. I don't know if you noticed, but we've got a really cool new logo and a website. We'll do media releases for events, and we'll have informational material on the website, as well as we have a project email list. So people can sign up on the website, and then that way when we're doing events or we're sending out additional information, we'll have a project email list that we can keep everyone informed with. This is just a screen grab of the website itself. I hope everyone to go and check it out. There actually on the website itself is the public engagement plan document. If you want to read through it in detail and see all of the things we're proposing to do, I'd encourage you to do that as well. And in terms of next steps, we are, as I mentioned, kind of trying to wrap up the visioning this fall. So utilizing that website, Envision Manzanita, envision-manzanita.squarespace.com. If you Google Envision Manzanita, it should pop up. Sometimes it pops up to the city's Envision Manzanita page, but there is a link to the project website on the city's webpage. So if you just want to go to the city's webpage, you should be able to find the project site. We're going to be starting some stakeholder interviews. We've asked the advisory committee to start doing what we call community conversations. So you may be invited to a community conversation by some of the committee members, or maybe just people in your community. These are kind of informal conversations where we have a little kit. You can go out and cover a specific topic area, or go to, maybe if you have a group that you meet with that you want to do that. You're all welcome to do these as well, but really we're asking the advisory committee to lead these community conversations. That's going to happen through this fall into early winter. We will be developing an online survey that will go in coordination with that Envision Manzanita Summit 1 in October, so that if folks that can't come to that summit will still be able to get their information and ideas on that online survey. And I think we again will be doing another briefing in October, potentially November, depending on the schedule, with you all to touch base again about where we are on the comp plan. And that, I think, is the last of the presentation. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen, and I will open it up for any questions before we're finished. Yeah, Bert.
Yeah, thanks, Scott. That's very, very helpful. I wonder if you could, as we break it up into these 4 sections, just because you got to tackle it somehow, right?
Yeah.
I think 2 observations. One is that I think it would be very important, because all this will be iterative, right?
For sure.
You learn something in one of the sections that really means you need to adjust something that you might have thought you had closed out. But it seems like at the end of this process, there should be an opportunity to step back and reflect and make sure that something's not missing that is integrated between these different sections. So that's one comment, and hopefully you'll be able to find time to do that.
Yeah, very important. I agree.
Okay, and then the second thing is that the goals are really the goals of the state process, right?
Yes.
And the language is the state process.
Yes.
And that shouldn't preclude, the citizens from having an additional goal, right?
You're right.
So I think that would be something important through the process, to make sure that the goals that are identified that, will align and put the city in compliance with the state goals is there. But if there's something missing, then I think there should be opportunity for the community to make sure that goal is identified. And as time moves on, obviously, just one thought I have is that, the word resilience isn't in that language of those sections. And as, climate change moves forward, as things change, economic factors change, it just seems like creating a resilient community should be considered as part of the language as the community looks at all these different things. Obviously, sustainability inherent in the ethos of the community. So I think in the air and the water conservation, those kind of things have probably come up. So those are kind of two general observations. Make sure that the community can have their own goal that is in addition to what the state goals are.
No, I really appreciate that. And I think the question that came up earlier is, are we adopting this, in pieces or all at once? And the fact is, we will have a chance to look back and reflect on some of the things. Maybe you're right. Maybe we get to transportation and we had some conversations about alleys when we were talking about housing, but we get to transportation and we're like, well, that's great, but how does it affect this piece of the transportation policies? And maybe we have to tweak some of the housing stuff. So it has to be iterative, and I think that's great. My second point would be that although we have to address all of the statewide planning goals, we don't necessarily have to have a chapter for each. So it might be that we lump them into less chapters, and there are some additional quote unquote goals that might come up in a chapter here or a chapter there that we should fold in, especially if it comes up through the outreach and it's important to the community. So I appreciate that comment as well. Karen?
I guess I'm just asking, do you have everything you need to do this work? Is there anything that the Planning Commission can do to support you in this, or to encourage, the rest of the community to participate? And I imagine that because council is here as well, that they might also have that same kind of question. Is there anything that council can do? I'm not going to speak for them, but
sure,
you might address that.
No, I think we luckily we have, I do believe in terms of technically we have everything we need. What we would love to have is your support and working with us through developing the plan. And that really does include, when we do these events, we're going to rely on you to try and help get your friends and family and coworkers to these events. I think once we have materials for you to review and look at, you've always been really good and attentive in terms of turning around ideas and thoughts once we get to some decision points where the Planning Commission and Council can help us with those. The reason that's helpful is because then when we get to adoption, everyone's familiar with it. It's not something new that we all have to learn about. We've all been through this together. And that's kind of our goal as a team, is to make sure that everyone understands what's going on step by step, so that when we get done, it's an easy thing to say, yes, we all support it. The community supports it. We've all been working on it. It represents our community and our vision. So that's important.
I will jump in and say I've been doing this a long time, and Karen, I never get that question. We never get that question. So I really appreciate that. And I will just second what Scott said. I think just thoughtful discussion, your gut reaction, your questions, just really participating so that when it does go, our final product, we feel really confident in it. So that's the best we can do, right? So I just appreciate that.
Yeah, me too. I think Frank had his hand up.
Yes, sir. Thank you, Scott. There's so much involved in this entire process, but I want to point out and sort of acknowledge the fact that your community engagement plan, to me, is outstanding. And I think it's really important because not a lot of people, there's a lot of low information citizens that just don't absorb all of the things that we do, and the few people that are in this meeting. And I think it's so important that people, things come and go and they're like, hey, I got no say into it. And so I think with everything that's going to happen, if we hear that at the end of the process, then that's going to be on them, because it looks like you guys have covered all the bases going forward. And I think that's outstanding, because I think it's so critically important, just from so many aspects, that the community feels like they're being heard and are a part of it. So thank you.
Thank you. I'm glad you liked the engagement plan. I mean, we always start every plan with that. I mean, you have to. It's number one. So, John, you have something?
Yeah, I just wanted to, first of all, I loved Bert's comment about resiliency in our community. And I would just like, and I think Marcy and the whole housing thing, we touched on it in the TSP, but looking at nature as our sort of template, diversity and adaptability are, I think, the way to achieve that generalized goal that we kind of need to look at in all our different, the housing and the land use and the zoning and the parking. And, again, I'll just throw out, Bert is absolutely right. A community of this size, and especially since we are pretty homogenous as a community, and we need to look as we go through this process of ways that we can encourage the diversity and the adaptability. So my 2 cents worth.
I appreciate that, John. Thank you.
John, I'll jump in. I just wanted to really thank you for bringing us back to that point, because I had a little note to also thank Bert for that. As somebody who writes a lot about housing and economics and, on these comp plans, I'll say the word resiliency, you'll see it in hazard mitigation chapter, you'll see it in open space and climate and energy, but you'll also see it in economic resiliency in terms of your workforce, your local workforce, but also in housing, the housing products that are there in the housing market locally, that it's resilient to changes. And we can all look back and know why that's so important. So again, that concept of tying these chapters together, making sure our policies make sense, making sure we're thinking about, could we weather a change, right? And whether that's the economy and housing, or we're talking about the climate and energy and open space. So again, that you'll see that word plenty throughout the final document, I'm sure. And so I appreciate you bringing that up right at the beginning.
Well, Karen, I think if there's no more questions, I'll give it back to you.
Okay, last call for questions before we move on. Thank you all very much for, well, first of all, let me say thank you. Look at how many people are here today. This is just so awesome. I really love that there's so much community engagement, and I hope that each of you that are out there listening with your video turned off, that you will come back every time these issues come up, so that we can have a really full, well-rounded product that comes out of this that represents exactly who we are and where we think we need to go. So thank you all for that, and thank you to our consultants for a great presentation. It's really helpful to know where we are. And I also want to appreciate that council is here today to hear this at the same time, so that it might streamline your work a little bit, not to have to report to too many different committees and commissions all at the same time. So, okay, so you're all excused if you want to go. The only thing we have left is any updates, and that would be what's coming down the pipe for Planning Commission to hear. So, Scott, what do you got?
As of now, I have nothing. I expect the workforce housing to be, their pre-app coming up pretty soon. So my guess is maybe October, November before we'll bring that before the Planning Commission.
And what we're talking about, the Highlands development?
The Highlands, the workforce housing project.
Okay, yeah. Okay, I didn't know that that's what we were calling it, so good. Thank you. I appreciate having that direction. Is there anything that we can be doing in the meantime to assist with this, since we have had a pretty skinny schedule all summer? Is there anything that we can do to help propel our progress on the comp plan update. Any ideas? Just wait for it to happen. It's hard. It's hard to wait. Okay, so if that's it, anybody else have anything they want to bring up before we say goodbye? I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I'll move to adjourn.
Okie dokie. That's all we need is a motion. So thank you very much for attending, and we'll see you all next month.
All right. Thanks. Great stuff, you
Thank you.
guys. Really good. Thanks.
See you guys.